Skyler's journey in Breaking Bad was defined by incremental erosion of normalcy. As the wife of a seemingly ordinary high school chemistry teacher, she began her arc as a devoted spouse who stood by Walter White during his cancer diagnosis. She endured his secrets, his absences, and his early lies, serving as the emotional pillar of the White household. At first, she supported him in his lowest moments, even working to stabilize the family's finances. But when Walt's unexplained absences and erratic behavior mounted, suspicion gave way to fury. But when Skyler later discovers her husband has a second phone, she's led to the next reasonable conclusion: Walt's cheating. However, after confronting Gretchen Schwartz, Skyler rules out an affair. At this point, Skyler only knows that her husband is lying about something, and she begins divorce proceedings. Skyler figures out Walt is cooking meth in Season 3, Episode 1, No Mas. Confronting Walt after their separation, Skyler accuses her husband of being a marijuana dealer, based on one of Walt's lies from Season 1 when Walt pretended Jesse was his weed dealer. Walt quickly reveals how greatly Skyler has underestimated the gravity of the situation, announcing he's really a meth manufacturer. If you're gripped by untold truths like this, hidden details, buried emotions, the stories beneath the stories, then don't just watch, be part of this journey. Hit subscribe, share it with someone who loves a good mystery, and let's keep uncovering what others miss. The revelation of Walt's meth empire shattered the marriage, yet paradoxically drew Skyler deeper into his orbit. This paradox became the defining trait of her story. Her progression from confused wife to reluctant accomplice was neither swift nor clean. When she decides to help Walt to launder the enormous sums of money he's earned from his drug business, her involvement in money laundering was both a sign of her devotion to her family and a reflection of her desperation to keep her loved ones safe. This decision marked a turning point in Skyler's character arc as she became more deeply entwined in Walt's criminal world. Skyler found herself under the weight of her husband Walt's criminal activities and a burning desire to protect her children. She was a character riddled with complexity and human flaws. Each compromise, lying to cover lies, one after the other, concealing assets, facilitating Walt's operations, stemmed not from greed, but from fear and obligation. She was also the most reviled character in the series. Skyler's character development was overshadowed by her husband's evolution. Despite her difficult situation, however, it's essential to recognize that Skyler's actions were merely a coping mechanism, her way of maintaining some semblance of normality in the face of a spiraling situation. Breaking Bad portrayed Skyler's journey through manipulation, lies, abuse, and torment at the hands of her husband. By the later seasons, she had ceased to be a partner and had become a hostage to Walt's choices, enduring manipulation, threats, and psychological abuse. By the series finale, her life lay in ruin. Hank was dead, Walt was on the run, and she was left as the sole caretaker of Walt Jr. and Holly. The final image of Skyler White in Breaking Bad, chain-smoking in a cramped apartment, worn down to a broken ghost of a human being, as Gunn described, symbolized the destruction Walt inflicted not just on rivals, but on his own family. What happened to Skyler White after Breaking Bad is a question that's plagued since the show concluded. Yet after the series closed its final chapter, and even with spin-offs El Camino and Better Call Saul, she remained absent. But her silence was louder. Better Call Saul Season 6, Episode 11, Breaking Bad, confirmed that she got a plea deal. In one of Better Call Saul's black and white scenes, Jimmy, disguised as Gene Takovic, calls his former assistant Francesca, who tells him Skyler White got her deal and that the only ones left to go after are you and Pinkman. This foreshadowed the poignant ending of Better Call Saul, Skyler's last contribution to the Breaking Bad universe. Moreover, while Better Call Saul's Gene Takovic scenes finally gave an answer to how the law dealt with Skyler, this only somewhat narrows down what really happened to Skyler White after Breaking Bad. Based on what happened to Skyler White towards the end of the series, there's room for some speculation about her fate. Originally, Breaking Bad had a Skyler suicide plan, but this didn't pan out. Her legal jeopardy was profound. In Breaking Bad's final episode, Walt gave Skyler the GPS coordinates of the desert burial site where Hank and Gomez's bodies lay, alongside the buried fortune. This gesture was not a gift, but a bargaining tool. By disclosing it, Walt provided Skyler with leverage against federal prosecutors. Withholding the information would have been obstruction. Handing it over allowed her to appear as a cooperating witness. From this vantage, Skyler's plea deal likely rested on three interlocking pillars. Her knowledge of the burial site, which gave the DEA closure over the deaths of 2 federal agents. Her willingness to testify against Walt and his associates, which strengthened the government's pursuit of remaining cartel ties, and her demonstrable coercion under Walt's influence, which her attorneys could argue negated full criminal intent. Legally, she still faced potential charges of aiding and abetting, money laundering, and conspiracy. Yet the combination of evidence she delivered, the sympathy factor of being a widow caring for 2 children, and the prosecutorial desire to close the Heisenberg case created strong incentive for a favorable deal. Francesca's casual remark that Skyler White got her deal should therefore be read as the culmination of these factors. Though never dramatized on screen, the logical inference is that Skyler avoided prison by trading information only Walt could have provided her, and by positioning herself not as a criminal partner, but as a survivor. Freedom did not equate to stability. By the end of the series, Skyler had lost access to Walt's millions. Any remaining assets were seized as criminal proceeds. The car wash, once a symbol of legitimacy, was tainted beyond repair. According to Screen Rant, she found modest work as a taxi dispatcher, moving with her children to a small apartment. Her relationship with Walt Jr. was fractured. Jr., whose hatred for his father culminated in a refusal to accept Walt's money, was left in Skyler's custody. Yet their bond was strained by trauma and the collapse of the family structure. Holly, still an infant, became both burden and anchor, the child too young to understand, yet the one who tethered Skyler to a sense of responsibility. Economically insecure, socially stigmatized, and legally constrained, Skyler's post-Breaking Bad life was one of diminished horizons. An overlooked but pivotal thread lies in Skyler's sister, Marie. Both women suffered parallel devastations. Skyler lost her husband to crime, Marie lost hers to Walt's empire. In Better Call Saul's finale, Marie appears in court to confront Saul Goodman, representing the lingering grief of Hank's death. Though Skyler is absent, the narrative strongly implies the sisters re-established contact. This reconnection carried potential light and darkness. On one hand, Marie offered Skyler a rare source of empathy, someone who understood the depth of betrayal and loss. On the other, Marie's kleptomania and bitterness suggested instability. Exposure to Saul's courtroom manipulations may have reinforced in both women the futility of trusting legal systems. One plausible trajectory is that trauma hardened them, driving Skyler and Marie into morally ambiguous survival strategies. Still, their destinies diverged from Walt's descent. Neither woman exhibited the ego-driven hunger for domination that defined Heisenberg. Their compromises, if any, would have been pragmatic, tethered always to family survival rather than empire building. Skyler's choices, though flawed, were grounded in rational self-preservation. Skyler is less an accomplice than a casualty, forced into complicity by proximity to power she could not control. The cigarette-smoking Skyler of the finale epitomized this trauma. In theorizing her post-series trajectory, one must balance resilience with fragility. On one hand, Skyler's demonstrated ability to operate under pressure, negotiating with Hank, improvising cover stories, orchestrating money laundering, suggests adaptive intelligence. On the other, the cumulative weight of grief, social stigma, and economic hardship points to a long road of recovery, punctuated by relapse into despair. Her children provided both grounding and burden. Walt Jr., grappling with adolescent rage, may have projected blame onto Skyler. Holly, too young to understand, symbolized innocence, but also tethered Skyler to a life of constant sacrifice. Thus, Skyler's future hinged on whether she could rebuild identity beyond victimhood, while carrying the dual role of mother and sole provider. Thus, her redemption remains partial. She escaped prison, shielded her children, and reclaimed fragments of autonomy. But the stain of her involvement ensured that she could never return to innocence. Ultimately, her absence from El Camino and Better Call Saul was not oversight. Vince Gilligan himself suggested that Skyler's story had been concluded in spirit, if not in detail. Where Walt achieved a grim satisfaction in death, and Jesse a fragile freedom and escape, Skyler embodied the lingering cost of Walter's choices. She is not remembered as triumphant or tragic, but as suspended, alive yet broken, free yet confined by stigma. This suspension mirrors the series' refusal to offer tidy resolution. Breaking Bad was never about heroes or closure. It was about the human wreckage left behind by one man's hunger for control. Skyler's survival, then, is itself a narrative statement. She outlived Heisenberg, but her life became a shadowed existence, haunted by choices not entirely her own. Skyler White's fate, grounded in the established narrative, is this. She secured a plea deal with the government, avoided prison, and struggled as a single mother in modest circumstances, reconnecting uneasily with her sister while raising Walt Jr. and Holly amid social stigma and psychological trauma. She remained morally flexible, but never descended into Walt's villainy, defined instead by endurance and sacrifice. Skyler's unresolved arc is less an omission than a deliberate silence to reckon with the collateral damage of Walter White's empire. Her fate is emblematic of the show's larger truth. Evil does not merely end with the death of its perpetrator. It reverberates, reshaping the lives of those left behind.